welcome. It's great to have you here. Again, I want to thank Leidos again, national partner. Thanks so much, Mitch, you and the Leidos team for sponsoring this. Can't do it without you, so really appreciate it. Well, as many of you know, the Army's network of installations at home and abroad have become much more than Army garrisons. Very, very complex, and the requirements, it's much more than a place to house soldiers. That's the most important thing, and their families. But maintaining that equipment and mobilization platforms and all the requirements, very, very complex, very difficult. And leading and managing Army installations has really become a profession in itself, very complex. What's required? It requires high quality, creative, energetic people, and we have some of the best here today as we look at how to tackle some of these important issues the Army's facing, for sure. With the release of the December 2020 Army Installations Strategy, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Energy and Environment, the Army G-9, and the Army Installation Management Commands have embarked on an aggressive and innovative plan to posture Army installations for the future. It's a great plan, but it is aggressive, and that will be really kind of the main focus of today, the future, obviously. And is one of the critical aspects of running Army installations is need for cooperation and collaboration with local communities outside the gate. We consistently see examples of that, how important that is, and how that helps solve a lot of these complex problems. And that's the reason we titled the symposium today, Army Installation Partnerships for Mission Assurance. Executing the Army Installation Strategy. So really about those partnerships, so key and critical with the community, industry, and solving these complex problems. I think it's clear to all that, again, innovation will be the key to success for the installation management community, especially in today's fiscally constrained environment. Installations will never get the funding they need. I think it's one thing I saw as senior commander multiple times over my last 12 years serving, and they'll never get the money they need. So how do you get after it in an innovative way? Again, there's a lot of challenges, but we'll look at some folks that have some great plan and great ideas today for sure. Some of the key questions we're going to dive into, what will the future look like, both on and off post? What are the impacts? I was talking earlier, folks, you look at who would have anticipated some of the, with the number in the climate change of number of storms that has increased. And I know I've been to installations where the damage has just been unbelievable, where for 30, 40 years they had minimal damage from storms, and all of a sudden it's almost devastating at an installation. So absolutely key. How will our installations support the Chief of Staff of the Army's people first and readiness? It's got to be, obviously, it's a balance supporting between both of those. What is the U.S. Army, as well as our other military services, what are they doing to make installations more efficient at carrying out a variety of important missions? Very important. How will we secure our installations? Again, boy, we've seen that change over time, the physical security, but again, now threats that you can't even see and you can't even identify where they're coming from. And installations are clearly targets, no doubt about it. And finally, how would the Army reshape and leverage installation services to ensure the well-being of our most important warfighting asset, soldiers and their families? Always a difficult challenge. And again, the standard has been going up, and it's a good thing, but it continues to go up, and it continues to be difficult as things are more expensive. And so as we look at many of these challenges, all very important issues. And again, a good portion of the discussion today will revolve around some of the realities facing the Army and the Department of Defense now and into the future. So this forum provides a venue for essential exchange of information between Army leaders and service and industry counterparts. And we thank you for being here, our industry counterparts in particular, and in areas of much anticipated Army requirements, expected resources, contract vehicles, all those things are part of the discussion. We have over 150 professionals participating in the symposium today, which is great. Again, great to have you all here. And there's no doubt that the success of Army installations will depend on this collective effort, this collaboration and cooperation. It includes senior level executives from leading companies, and provide many of the goods and services and that our garrison commanders rely on across the force, no doubt about it. So really appreciate, again, your participation here with these tough issues. We'll have some great panels. Don't be afraid to ask the tough questions. I think that's probably the best thing you get out of this. That's actually, one of those things that's tough in the virtual world sometimes, but right here with a connection, it's not. And as we're networking and as we're listening to the panels, we can get at those tough questions, and it's got a heck of a lot better, no doubt, than having to be in virtual only. We're pleased to have with us the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Energy, and Environment, Mr. Paul Farnan. Paul, thanks for being here, as well as the Assistant Chief of Staff, G-9, Lieutenant General Jason Evans, who's will be here a little bit later, and his deputy, Mr. Dan Klippstein. Dan, thanks for being here. So if all goes well, as you heard from Alex, we'll have Secretary Panetta, and I can tell you, I heard him a couple weeks ago an event at CSIS, and it's just terrific. So we're hoping that virtual link works, and we'll have that at 11:20. And finally, I want to thank again our national partners. Thanks for all you do. That partnership is so key. Thanks for being here and being part of this. It makes a huge difference. Your support is critical to our Army, critical to the future, no doubt about it. So as the Army looks ahead to, as we focus and efforts 2035 and beyond, it's an exciting time for installation bases, but there's a lot of challenges between now and then. We're not just fast forwarding to that. So it's a challenging time, but lots of opportunity. And again, let's dig into some of those key issues and how we can help. So without further ado, I'm going to go through. I had about a 30-minute introduction, Dan, but I shortened it. And Dan Klippstein, the Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff, G9. Come on up, Dan. Thanks. Let's get started.
So, General Brown, thank you. Since General Brown covered everything I wanted to cover, I'll just start taking your questions right now. So, but sir, thanks very much. And thanks to AUSA for hosting this important event. One of the things I guess, sir, is, we were talking earlier, how do you tell a joke? Maybe we're better able to tell jokes these days because we're not virtual anymore, so you can see the audience reaction. So one of the things I thought about was it's kind of bold to start this event in April. When you know that April in 1906 saw the San Francisco earthquake, the sinking of the Titanic in 1912, and on this very day, we nearly lost Apollo 13, as many of you saw for the Tom Hanks movie. I will try not to create any national disasters that might rival that. But on the positive side, I would tell you that one of the parts about April is the fact that we actually get baseball back in play in opening day. And being a golfer, an avid golfer, I was glad to see the Masters last week was kicked off. So, go Scotty Scheffler, so I'm happy to see that. But I'm also pleased to see many leaders from the city, county, state, and other agencies here, as well as industry and academia. We couldn't have picked a more appropriate time to talk about the risks to our installations. But before we begin to talk about some of the specifics, I'd kind of like to set a large picture here to kind of show you where I think installations are and as General Brown laid out some of the challenges. Sun Tzu said, "To subdue the enemy without fighting is the acme of skill." If our installations are not modernized and prepared for the future, our Army's ability to mobilize and project power will be impaired, if not negated, and we will fall prey to that axiom. By enabling our forces to live, work, and train while benefiting from the highest quality of life and leveraging the resources that are available from our nation on our installations can maximize our Army's ability to mobilize, project power, provide a quality of life for all of our soldiers, whether it's in times of competition, crisis, or conflict. So what then is the role of our installations in the 21st century? Our installations are much more than they were in the 19th and even the 20th century. They're more complex than the dwellings that are there, the office complexes that we occupy, the dining facilities that serve soldiers, the training areas that are available, and the supporting infrastructures that are there. Our installations are critical enablers, and they are the foundation for which we enable our Army to train and project power and to defend the nation. If a soldier is unhappy with his or her living quarters, is worried about household finances, can't find resources or locations of things that need for his family or her family, and they can't connect with people or get online to take the needed training that they have to take, then that is a real impact to what we need as our soldiers, as our warfighter. And that impairs our ability to attract and retain quality soldiers for our Army. It's therefore incumbent on us to ensure our installations are as modern, effective, supportive, and mission enhancing as any of our material equipment, such as tanks, and even if you think about aircraft carriers, combat airframes, and even simple things such as the combat rifles that we're developing today. Our installations are that important. And they are reliant, quite frankly, on many of you sitting in this room, our teammates out there in industry, academia, then the community. Members of law enforcement and emergency services all have an impact on what our installations can do for us today, and the local people that support and work around or on our installations. Our Army communities and Army and the local communities, by providing the modern installations, provide that high quality of life for our soldiers and family. And with it, they enable us to provide deterrence to those that would do us harm. So when you think about our installations, we need to think in time. We have to project that role of our installations forward 10, even 20 years from now. And this is where the strategies that we have as an Army start to play in. Our National Defense Strategy has recently been published. Although it's classified, there is an unclassified paper that's out. And the events unfolding in Eastern Europe between Russia and Ukraine provide us some points to consider as we look at how to protect our installations. Our national strategy points out that the threats to our installations are multi-domain in nature. And we should expect those installations to be assaulted, whether in many forms. And installations that are protected enable us to execute that national defense strategy, to defend the homeland against a multi-domain threat, to deter strategic attacks, and to build a resilient and joint force. But what are those threats that they face? And they are bigger than just the kinetic threats, right? They are terrorism from home or abroad, the cyber threats, of which we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the cyber impacts on our installations today. Threats from climate change. As you know, we've published a climate strategy, and Paul, I'm sure Paul Farnan's going to talk a little bit more about that as well. And many of us, we've all lived through the last couple of years, last 2 years at least, with pandemics. And what impact does that have on our installations, our ability to support our forces and enable outcomes and modernize our installations? As we think ahead to the threats that face our installations, one might think about Greek mythology and the Hydra that was there. Every time you cut off a head, it grew another one back. But unlike Hercules, I don't think we're going to be able to defeat that Hydra in total. But we can, though we can't eliminate the threats completely, we can still work collectively together to identify and mitigate those threats that we can identify and shore up the vulnerabilities that exist. And that becomes a concerted effort from all of us. The Army recently published its Army installation strategy. And its end state was pretty clear. Modern, resilient, sustainable installations, enhancing strategic readiness in a contested MDO environment, while providing quality facilities, services, and support to our soldiers, families, and civilians. How are we going to achieve this? Well, that strategy lays out a number of lines of effort. And interestingly enough, recently the Secretary of the Army published a paper, or her priorities, and I'll just pull a couple of those that actually support those lines of effort that I'll get to in a moment. It says, put the Army on a strategic path. Well, our installations need to be supportive in order to give soldiers the quality of life and the families that support them to allow them to focus on the mission. She said, ensure the Army becomes more data-centric and can operate in a contested environment. And the installations will need to achieve this by improving our networks, our data analysis, and application of critical metrics. And continue efforts to be resilient in the face of climate change. And our installations are prioritizing this now with the climate change strategy. And those will be briefly touched on as well. So when you break that down and you add that to the 4 lines of effort that are inside of our Army's installation strategy to attract, retain, and enable people, project power and sustain operations in a contested environment, modernize our installations while supporting the modernized Army. And in fact, folks, if we can't modernize our installations at pace with our modernization capabilities that we are trying to field, we have a challenge that we'll have an imperfect solution for some period of time before we can truly realize the effects of a modern Army and modern capabilities. And then lastly, but not least, the healthy, sustainable training, working, and living environment on our installations that promote stewardship. And this is, again, where we tie in with the communities to ensure that we can work together to provide the capabilities for our installations. So as we lay this installation strategy out, it's been laid out, there's also an implementation plan that's been built. And there's 31 tasks associated, and I promise I won't go through all the tasks. They're pretty laborious, but realize that every one of those tasks has somebody responsible for executing it and driving the change, leading that change for our Army. And that includes from developing installation doctrine, which we haven't had, to developing an action plan to address threats to our information systems to support installation commanders, to conducting things we call a black start exercise. And many of you may be familiar with that. It's really a no-notice exercise to shut down the installation on critical capabilities or the critical parts of our installation to see if they're resilient enough to sustain in a time of crisis, whether it's removing energy or water or something else, to see what the installation can do, because they all are supposed to have plans to operate in those types of crises. We want to test those out. But to execute that, it requires work with community partners to secure the most efficient and responsive services to support those installations. And that can be everything from power, water, to emergency services. Another key threat to our installations, and one that we're working closely to address, is, and it will come in, and I've talked a lot, already mentioned, it's the cyber threat, but a thing that we have worked in the G-9 is we have stood up what we call the Control Systems Governance Office. We just short for Cisco. We got to have an acronym for everything, right? So we'll call it the Cisco. And you'll see here this afternoon, Chris Thomas, who is our installation director, IT director, will be here to talk about that more in depth. But the actual requirement of the Cisco is to champion and facilitate policies and resources that are to enable Army control systems, those things that sit on our installations that control everything from the heat in this building to the electrical, to the water, to all types of systems that are out there. And those are all connected in one way, shape, or form to the DODIN. All of those are vulnerable to attack. If an adversary can infiltrate into those systems and control those systems, then we don't have control of what happens on our installations. And so the Cisco is designed to understand what those vectors are, and to put all of those systems under some type of scrutiny to make sure that they're hardened against infiltration. And that works hand in glove with a number of other agencies and folks within the Army staff, like the G6 and our CIO. But we want to ensure that there's a standard approach that we can identify and address vulnerabilities. So Chris will talk a little bit more about the cyber piece. Partnerships and intergovernmental service support agreements, also key. That's another way to address threats, but it's also a way to strengthen our installations. And because those are only as useful and powerful as the people that's behind them, with partners like you. And I know Ivan Bolden sitting out here somewhere, so Ivan recently was out in California doing a number of things out there with the government to try to build up some of the partnerships. But what I ask you, for those of you in the industry, please don't try to drag him away from us. We need him right now, okay? So, but Ivan is a commodity, and so I give him a lot of credit for doing the things that he's, for improving those partnerships. But protecting installations is a partnership with the community. And the Army Installation Strategies and Implementation Plan identifies those places where we need help to ensure that we have clear lines of communications and expectations between federal, state, local, and military departments on our installations. We try to set clear lines of expectations such that the securities and the utilities to increase investment on our installations and enhance the provision of services in order to modernize our infrastructure, and just as importantly, to improve that cooperation with folks outside the gate, because we know that because the installation the homeland is no longer a secure environment, it's not just the installation that's under threat, it's the local community that supports it. So we look to understand the resources and the services shared with partners to enable that protection and freedom of maneuver to ensure that we can synchronize what we do with local communities to achieve a collective outcome. As you think about that, we put a lot of emphasis on our senior commanders out at the installations, those general officers that are responsible for managing installations or overseeing them. And so there's a pre-command course that we send them through. There's a pre-command course that we send the colonels that command those installations through. And we have, as General Brown was alluding to, we have a core of civilians who are professionals at managing these installations. And these, we call them functional communities, whether they're functional community 27, which is the housing folks, or functional community 29, which is our installation management folks. And we work together to create an education process so we can have world-class professionals on those installations. And it's through partnerships with your communities, with other agencies, and with folks that allow us to educate and train them, and also to show them what best practices might look like outside the gate. So with your help, that's what we're trying to do. And, you know, part of this is, in fact, in the course that we're going to run a course next week for 10 of our selected deputy garrison commanders these are GS-15s that we're bringing here. And they're going to go through a tabletop exercise that's being run by one of our partner organizations. And Fred, thanks very much for setting that up, Fred Muir. But they're going to run a tabletop exercise on exactly what we've been talking about. What threats are to the installation? How do they prepare for those? And how do they work with people outside the gate to mitigate that threat? So these are critical aspects of what we're doing to try to get at some of the threats that approach our installations, but how we can also work to mitigate that. Talked a little bit about the intergovernmental service agreements. And again, I talked about Ivan leading that effort, and that is a critical effort for that, because as installations grow, communities and the installations need to build those and improve those relationships in order for us to be successful in the future. I would note that we are approaching an interesting milestone for IGSIS. We're going to have our 100th here pretty soon. And we also have a number of critical utility services. We've done a number of things with utility companies, and we've built privatization issues and IGSIS with Fort Carson, with Redstone. And one of the most important ones, I think, that we have is the computer-aided dispatch for emergency services, trying to tie in the things that we do on installations with the support that comes from outside, because a lot of times you're going to find that our emergency installations and our fire and emergency services are tied together with communities, and we mutually support each other. So the last thing I want to talk about real quick is the climate strategy. And I know Paul Farnon's going to talk quite a bit about that, and he'll share his insights on how best our Army is going to try to implement that strategy. But it's critical that we do that. I mean, it's undeniable that we have climate change. There are installations that are impacted. If it's not just the fact that the weather's warming, but it affects our training on our installations, whether you have fires or you have droughts, but it also will affect how soldiers have to be prepared to operate in a different environment in the future. And so how we manage the climate effects and improve our energy sources on our installations is key. As General Brown mentioned, you know, resources are challenged, right? There's not a money tree out there anywhere. So we have to make the best use of the resources that we get. And so we're trying to maximize every dollar we get on our installations to give us the biggest bang for the buck that we put in there, whether it's climate, whether it's partnerships, whether it's improving our modernizing installations. There are very tough choices that are made, but you know, we're maximizing all those. So let me just close real quick. I know I covered a lot of stuff. I went across the wave top on a lot of things, but make no mistake, our installations are entwined in our communities, and we are trying to work together to predict, prevent, and adapt to a changing environment and the threats that we face. Our Army installations and you and our leaders need to remain vigilant to the threats and to the opportunities that exist out there in supporting our installations, and to make them the best that we can in order that we can execute our national strategy. So let me thank you again for your time and attention. Thanks for joining us today. Just as no soldier can fight alone, our Army cannot protect itself, and it can't protect its installations without your help. So I look forward to moving forward with the Army's installation strategy and all the things that we do to try to improve and modernize our installations with your help. Sure, thank you very much. Questions? Awesome.
Come
on, sir.
Sorry, I
Yeah.
didn't want to let you go without a question. John Clem, Johnson Controls. My question's about cybersecurity,
Mhm.
and I don't see the installation completing their mission without connected control systems that are cyber secure, and you're not going to achieve your data objectives without cyber secure. And right now it's a little bit of a pickup game out there. We're out in the Army installations and the guys are doing their best, but there's a knowledge gap and there's a technology gap. And the only way to solve that is with a strong partnership with industry and then resourcing. And I'm not saying you got to spend a lot of money. There's ways to use other people's money, but there doesn't seem to be a focus on the cyber and that connected technology. And so I'm really interested in what is the implementation plan? Lots of pilot projects and a lot of disjointed efforts. How's it all going to get synced together?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I probably won't have the best answer for you because I would tell you that that's a great question for Chris Thomas when he comes in as our IT guy, because he's much more entwined into the connectivity with the G6, with our CIO and in fact our new PCO that's just come in to look over to pull that together. But I would tell you there is a concerted effort. Your concern in your question is spot on. We are concerned about the cyber implications on our installations. Yeah, there's a lot of pilot programs that we're putting in place right now because there's some things we don't understand, and we're trying to find those gaps, and we're trying to bring that together in a coherent fashion. I would tell you the specifics of that are again something a little bit outside of my realm, but nonetheless, what you raise is an important issue, and one that if we don't address, and we know that's one of the reasons we stood the CISGO up. It's not the solution to every problem. It's really focused on control systems, the 5 types of control systems that exist right now, and how we can ensure that those are protected. But the cyber network on our installations has to also be protected, because when we train out there, we're also using the network. We're also using, all these capabilities that are coming to us right now that we're modernizing all have connections to a network, satellite, GPS, whatever it is, have a connection, and a lot of that runs through the installation. So it is a concern for us. I just don't have. I can't tell you exactly what the plan is. I know there is one, but I kind of defer that to Chris Thomas. Maybe I set him up. I'm not sure. Yes, sir.
Hi, good morning.
Yeah.
I am actually one of your privatized utility partners. So we try to stay as far away from your Doden as possible. But with regards to privatized utilities and a focus on security there, do you expect to give final direction and contract modifications in order to give us some sort of direction beyond just the NIST compliance, but and certified auditors that are coming? We're trying to get up whichever level it's going to be, level 3, level 4. What do you expect that to come to us? We've spent nearly $1 million to date, but we're kind of in a holding pattern to determine what direction do you guys see us going, and how do we best support you?
So I would tell you, I don't have it. Again, boy, it sounds like kind of like a wind dummy up here, but I do know that we have had a concerted effort on our utility systems and the privatization efforts that we've put in place. We had a pause for a while to take a look at what we were really getting and what we were doing. We've re-energized that effort through AMC and through the Army Installation Management Command to go after and understand the lengths of the contracts, the expectations. But to your specific question, I would have to defer because we in the G-9 don't necessarily control those decisions. Many of those are made out of at AMC or at the MCOM level in terms of, are they ready to move forward? Do they have the right conditions in place? So I'd have to defer that question. But I would tell you that, but to answer a different, maybe just to give you a little bit of confidence, that is being worked. I mean, there is a group, I would just say that the CG of AMC, the CG of MCOM, have and even IE&E and G9 are focused on that, but there are some decision authorities that rest, and there are some issues that have to be resolved in order to get to what you're talking about. And I don't want to set Paul Farnan up, but Paul, is there anything that you want to add to that, or? Yeah. So there it is. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I don't have a more precise answer for you. But like I said, my intent is to give you the confidence that there are folks that are working on it. And it is another. So last December, I'll just back up a second. Last December, we had an energy summit down at Redstone Arsenal, where we brought together partners and we brought together the key players from OSD and the Army and energy partners. And we had a conversation about these issues and what we're trying to do to get to resolve those. So again, my intent is to give you confidence. I just can't give you a direct answer.
Hey, Dan, TW.
Yeah, TW.
At Amoresco, Director of Army Programs. Can you talk a little bit about where the Army is going with ensuring that the installations have master planners?
Yeah.
One of the things that we're dealing with as industry is we understand the efforts that are going on with the IEWPs, IEPs, whatever you want to call them. We see a tremendous effort, but from the installations trying to get these plans together and to address the shortfalls and gaps that they have on critical infrastructure, right? So they're doing that, but there's so many pieces to it. I mean, you got CWEs, you got IEWPs, you've got a number of assessments that are actually ongoing that, in some cases, commanders have the assets as far as a good master planner, but we're finding even on power projection platforms where there are shortfalls in those critical people that you need to put these plans together. So as you talk about Black Start, we talked to garrison commanders about Black Start exercises, but it's a scary situation, right? So can you just kind of what are we doing to make sure that the installations have the proper planning resources to connect all this together? Because as much as we want to go out and make all these things work with cyber and everything else, there's a continuum in that plan that needs to connect all that. And I just don't see, I'm not seeing it. Maybe I'm missing it.
Okay. So at the installation level, obviously there are shortfalls, both hiring and skill sets. And so there's efforts to try to recruit, retain, and bring on. And I go back to saying, these are the installation professionals. A lot of these are engineers, and engineers have we have to find the right skill sets. And I would tell you that installations are constantly struggling to find the right people. The other challenge is, I think, is that trying to prioritize the workload, and there are in many of our installations don't have aren't 100% on fill, and there is again a recruitment effort to continue to try to do that. Installation commanders prioritize their responsibilities and their actions. So I would tell you that we had a conversation at the when we briefed the programmatics out. We had one of the conversations we had was about making sure that we had the workforce. Can we buy the workforce? Can we support the workforce? Can we attract and retain that workforce? And TW, that's exactly what you're getting at. It's a matter of recruiting and retaining that workforce and getting them in the right skills in the right place to do that job. Installations and installation commanders are aware of the requirements. IMCOM, AMC is aware of the requirements. It's unfortunate that we don't have a stadium full of folks so we can just shift folks around. But right now, I think it's a workforce issue that we have to work through. That's about the best I could offer to you. But again, to give you confidence, it's not one that people don't recognize and aren't working on. So, but there's not a plan sitting on a wall somewhere that I'm aware of, and there could be. But again, to give you confidence, we understand the problem and we're working it. I just can't tell you that every installation is going to be perfect. And even at the power projection place and power projection and mobilization sites that we have, we try to turn the resources there as well, because those tend to be many of our focal points. But I think that's just a matter of trying to get the right people at the right time. And there's a plan, but it's still working. Sir.
Sir Fred Neer.
Fred.
You mentioned the requirement side,
Yeah.
and we're all working on the requirements. I'm sort of curious to something you said in your opening comments regarding the underlying assumption of the strategy that Army installations are going to be renewed and modernized at the same rate as the rest of the Army. Are we actually seeing that with regards to the resources being allocated in the POM and the other programming documents, so that we are sure that, in fact, that is happening on the installation side?
Yeah, Fred, good question. The idea to modernize our installations at pace with our material solutions is a goal, right? I mean, I think that's what we aspire to do that. We know that the physics of making that happen. When you get down to how much time do you need for military construction? How much time does it take to do the environmental analysis? Those have years in terms of lead time, all right? And those have to lead a stationing decision, which oftentimes becomes, a challenge for chief and the secretary, because that stationing decision isn't just made at the Army at the department level. There's other factors that are involved in that. But the idea is to try to, as early as possible, recognize what those capabilities look like, what they require, and then identify where we're going to locate those or station those, whether it's here in the continental United States, or in some cases, as we look at our strategy, forward base those in either the Pacific or in Europe. Do we have how do we lay in those resources so that when that capability shows up, there are barracks, there are motor pools, there are support facilities in place, or they've been renovated, right? Because it's not all about new. It's also sometimes it's about renovation. And so, great question. The goal is to modernize at pace. The reality is that resources kind of drive some of that. And, sometimes we have an imperfect solution at the beginning, but we will get to a better solution at the end. And so it just takes time to get there. And as General Brown adequately pointed out, resources are a challenge for anybody. And for us, when you've got about $1 billion a year for construction, maybe a little bit more, and then you've got, somewhere around $6 or $7 billion that you can put into restoration and modernization and sustainment. So sometimes you're looking at repurposing buildings as opposed to building new. So these are the things that installations, and I go back to TW's point, master planners look at when they get told that, hey, we're thinking about putting capability X at your installation. They're starting to look at what's on their installation and what can they repurpose, what can they move around in order to accommodate a new capability that may look different and be different than what we have today. And then how do we execute that environmental analysis? So thanks for the question, Fred. Appreciate it.
Sir, last question right here.
Sure.
Good morning. Tim Cadavy, former reserve component leader. My
Sure.
question's related, as you were talking about AMC and MCOM, very much AC centric. We
Yes,
think
sir.
about installations. We're thinking about active component forts, camps, and posts. My question is, as you think about strategy plans and resourcing, are the two reserve components, Army Reserve, Army National Guard, included in that strategy, and are you going to pull them along as you think about modernization and growing for the future? Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, sir. Thanks very much. And thanks for reminding me about the Compost 2 and 3, because they are part of that solution. The installation strategy addresses is a total Army approach. Now, recognizing that the Guard and the Reserve all have some uniqueness as part of what they have for installations. Some of them have installations, others have just readiness centers and so forth, but climate and the installation strategy applies to them just as well. And as we look to modernize, our installations, we're also looking to modernize how the Guard and Reserve function as well in terms of supporting their requirements. So thank you, sir. I appreciate you pointing that out. But it is a total Army approach and a total Army strategy for the installations and for the climate change.
Great questions. Please give Mr. Klippstein a nice round of applause.
Well, great. Off to a good start, folks. There will be tough questions today for our speakers. These are challenging times, but before I introduce Mr. Farnan, I did want to point out one success story that was all of you have been following. Last month, we had Army Chief of Staff General Jim McConville speak to us down at the Army Museum, and he referred to the Army Armor Brigade Combat Team at Fort Stewart that